Hello and welcome to Crushing Comics, the show where I'm reunited with my comic collection halfway around the globe and we try to rekindle the fire in our relationship. I'm here with my wall of bricks of comic books and I'm going to choose one to unwrap and we'll talk about it if I know anything about it. Part of the fun here is that I have a pretty big collection, and while there's a lot of it that I've read, a lot of it is X-Men, which I'm surprised every video hasn't been X-Men so far because there's a lot. Some of it are things that I haven't read and been meaning to. Some of the things I kind of just impulse bought because it sounded cool if they were in a oversized collected edition. So we are definitely going to hit some things that I just don't know that much about, and I guess I'll just tell stories. But let's see what we pulled today. You know, you really think about all the material it takes to move, right? Like moving isn't free, and it costs money to move things physically, but it also costs money to get things ready to move. And when you think about it, maybe just moving around the corner or down the block, or the first time you moved around your own city and all of your friends helping you, you got them pizza and beer, and it's a totally different scale of move than moving like a whole family home, especially if you have some kind of unique collection of something like 25,000 comic books or a dozen guitars in a recording studio. So it was overwhelming, and imagine just trying to do that a few miles into the suburbs. We did it close to 9,000 miles to the southern hemisphere, so it was quite daunting, and we're just getting to the end of it now. Let's see what we pulled. Oh, this is going to take a while to get through. Okay. Alright, so we've pulled a little block of event books, and what I mean by event books is non-ongoing books, but books that occurred alongside Marvel's ongoings that told a blockbuster story, usually with a cast of a couple different franchises, and this is the block that I pulled today. Young Avengers Children's Crusade. Oh wait, the first one is Young Avengers Omnibus, that's out of order with the others. Then Young Avengers Children's Crusade, then Original Sin, and then Age of Ultron. I'm going to shuffle these into the right order and try not to totally bend your ear off talking about them, because I have some stuff to say about every one of these books. Oh yes, I do. So this is from kind of the modern era. The oldest one here is Children's Crusade, which started, I think, at the beginning of 2011. So this is all since I've been a regular reader, and I have definitely been through all of these. Children's Crusade, this makes a perfect sequel to the last episode, because this book ends Heinberg and Chung's involvement with the Young Avengers. So they completed their original 2005 series, and then they kind of bounced around in a series of miniseries. They teamed up with the Runaways. Anytime there was an event like Secret Invasion or something, they would get their own little 3 or 4 issue series, but nothing substantial had really been done with them in a way that made everybody pay attention the way they did to the first series. But there was this dangling plot thread that Wiccan, which is young, I think his name's, I'm not going to say his name, I could get it wrong, it might be Billy Kaplan, but that might be his boyfriend's name. No, his boyfriend's name is Teddy. So there's this dangling thread that even though he was originally dressed as an Asgardian, he did a lot of magic, and he kind of looked like Scarlet Witch. Scarlet Witch, of course, famously had a pair of twins that turned out to maybe be figments of her imagination, and Billy, although not a twin, seemed to have a strange kinship to one of the other Young Avengers, Speed, who looked a lot like Quicksilver, who is Scarlet Witch's brother. Are you following? Okay, good. So this series finds the Young Avengers kind of just like bumming around and not really getting to be heroes because the Avengers have got that on lockdown, and Wiccan says, well, what about Scarlet Witch? She's been absent all this time because she's been missing since, of course, House of M, when she muttered those famous words, "No more mutants," and she hadn't really appeared save for 1 or 2 random appearances in the Marvel Universe since then. I have a Scarlet Witch guide all about that. And so they start looking for her, and they find some surprising things. And along the way, it necessarily involves the X-Men as well as X-Factor, who were all very much involved in House of M at the beginning and Scarlet Witch's disappearance. And the end of this book has major, major implications for the ongoing story of Marvel and for the X-Men, and ultimately kind of sets up Avengers versus X-Men to a degree. Oh, what else to say about this? So it's kind of interesting that, and it came out, by the way, bi-monthly. I think just to give Chung enough time to illustrate all of it, because he's not the fastest, and this is, I believe it's 9 issues. Yeah, 9 issues long. So here's something to think about with this book, which is that Heinberg is not one of the major architects of the Marvel Universe, which at this point was Bendis, Brubaker, Fraction, Hickman, and probably one other one who I'm not recalling. Sorry, fifth white dude. And he wasn't really a part of that, but he did have ownership and a story to tell about the Young Avengers. So even though this has a lot of implications across many different franchises, even Fantastic Four to a degree because Doom is here, and actually monkeys with his chronology a little bit in Hickman's brilliant Fantastic Four run, Heinberg had to kind of thread the needle and tell the story about his characters, but also tell this world-shaking Scarlet Witch story. So I don't know if I would recommend picking this up just on its own. I think if you've read Young Avengers, you should definitely pick it up. And I think if you are a big X-Men fan and are really into the No More Mutants era of X-Men, especially from Messiah Complex to Second Coming, this story directly follows Second Coming. Pretty much the next issue from Second Coming, 526, has a preview for this in it. Okay, what would be next chronologically? Oh boy. Well, next logically, even if it's not chronologically, is Young Avengers by Kieron Gillen and Jamie McKelvie. So this is where that team shows up next, except for it's not entirely that team. We have Speed, who's not in all... Oh no, that's not even Speed, even though he's got silver hair. That's Marvel Boy. Wiccan, Hulkling, and Kate Bishop. But then we also have America and Marvel Boy and Prodigy from X-Men. This is a run that I really love. It has a few narrative hiccups in it that are quite deliberate, and I think it just depends on how much benefit of a doubt you give to the creative team to kind of achieve what they want to achieve, whether or not you're going to buy some of the little hiccups in the book. And some of the ongoing huge conceits too, not just hiccups. So this finds the team not so much of a team, but they're brought together partially because of young Loki. So Kieron Gillen had been writing Loki as a tween in Journey into Mystery that had just wrapped up at the end of the Marvel Heroic Age as we were going through Avengers vs. X-Men to get to Marvel Now, which started in the first month of 2013. And so this is one of the launch books of Marvel Now, and it took a couple of disparate pieces of things that had been around, namely some of the Young Avengers and Gillen's Loki, and put them all together into one book. It's a book that deals a lot with generational concerns, which is interesting because all of these Young Avengers are legacy heroes that are in a way some kind of echo or knockoff of a previous hero, but their generational concerns are less to do with that, which I think their original run is more concerned with, and more to do with parents and the idea of growing up and being responsible for yourself. It's also, not to spoil a great panel at the end, but it's a team that is pretty much an all-queer superhero team, as the characters point out towards the end. There's folks on this team that are gay, that are bisexual, that are pansexual, and that are questioning. And it's really amazing to see that put together in a way that's not... it was never the remit of the book. It was never by this very gay superhero team, although I would still buy that book. But it was a book that was just said by this Young Avengers team, and at the end it turned out you had been buying the other thing too, and that was really awesome for me. I love when Marvel reflects the reality of the world around us, and the reality of the world around us, it is not that out of the question for me to be in a room full of all of my friends and have all of them be somewhere on the LGBTQ I might have got them wrong. LGBTQ, we'll say that. Spectrum. I don't want to leave off A, which is not for allies. It is typically for asexual. So let's pick up the next book. Here is Age of Ultron. This book, gosh, Bendis had been teasing the events of some kind of alternate future where Ultron takes over for a little bit of time in his own books throughout the Heroic Age, but it seemed like the coming of Avengers vs. X-Men throughout 2012 somewhat derailed the story, so everybody was kind of surprised to see that it popped up as effectively the first event of Marvel Now in 2013. But the thing is that a lot of the issues had been scripted and even drawn prior to that point, and were in the can, and so this sits sort of uncomfortably on top of Marvel Now. It doesn't make total sense. The way that it does make sense is it's kind of wrapped into its own retcon where none of the things truly happen because they got resolved, but it does create a couple of effects that are important to Marvel Now. Namely, it makes Wolverine killable due to some of the time shenanigans he goes through, and they're actually kind of fun to read because it teams up Wolverine with the Invisible Woman, and that is a strange combination that we've never really seen before. So a lot of people just beat up on this book because it was supposed to be this big thing. It's Brian Bendis, Brian Hitch, Brandon Peterson, and Carlos Pacheco, which is like one of the best creative assemblages you could get for Marvel in 2012, and it kind of just like sad trombones its way off stage by the end. But if you don't come into reading it with that heavy expectation that we all had at that time that there was going to be some crazy blockbuster, and you just read it as a series, it's interesting. It's not my top pick for you. It's not something I think you should go buy while it's out of print, but it's an interesting book. And does at the end, although you don't have to read it at all to get this, usher in Neil Gaiman's Angela, who then, of course, joins Bendis's Guardians of the Galaxy team. But it's literally like a panel at the end of the book where she just suddenly arrives on Earth, and it's not like you need to read any portion of the book to appreciate that. Gosh, some of the art is really great. Brandon Peterson, of course, I always knew as somebody who had drawn a little bit of X-Men in the 90s, and that's really about all I knew about him. And he has this wonderful computer-illustrated format now that he draws in that tends to look very 3D and sumptuous. There's Angela. Also, this did usher in Galactus into the Ultimate Universe, which was a rare reflection of events happening in the main Marvel Universe and then them having an effect in the Ultimate Universe, but that didn't really go a whole lot of places, and the Ultimate Universe continued to survive up until the Secret Wars in 2015. All right, one last book. Oh my goodness, I told you there were 4 big ones. This is Original Sin. This was Marvel's, I believe, I'm going to say 2014 early summer event book. This is great. This is one that I would say, yes, track it down. Yes, read it. Here's why. Jason Aaron, this was his first turn at driving, and he's the one I forgot when I was talking about the architects earlier this episode. So he had never steered an event before, and it turns out he's real darn good at it. And I don't even like Jason Aaron all the time. I am not a Jason Aaron apologist. But he puts together a great little mystery in this book. He makes use of a really strange assemblage of characters along the way. He manages to deliver some important material for Thor, and he's in the middle of his Thor God of Thunder run, which is A+ comic books. But he also does some great development for Nick Fury, and also just unlocks some interesting combinations of characters. The entire thing is drawn by Mike Deodato, who's one of my favorite artists and has been ever since he was on Wonder Woman with William Messner-Loebs back in the 90s. And this is just a fun read. It's like blockbuster, big screen superhero comic books. And although there were some other comics that tied into this plot, it's not like you have to go and read a bunch of sideline stuff. All you need is in this book. It's 9 issues of the actual series, and then there was a kind of sideline backup series with short stories that included some of the other revelations happening during the story. But you don't even have to read them, and honestly, not all of them are all that great. What you want is the main Aaron stuff. And one other thing, which happens to not be in this book. Aaron teamed up with Al Ewing, who had been writing Loki, Agent of Asgard at the time, to write an Original Sins miniseries that brought together Thor and Loki and introduced them to Angela and wove her into their plot. See how this ties in with Age of Ultron? I couldn't have planned this better. So it's really good. It has really good art. It's a great story. And to this point, it has not been collected in any of the Thor oversized collections, but it is in the Original Sin Companion, which otherwise is a little bit of a flaccid book, if you were to ask me, but it does have that. It's also in its own trade paperback. That is highly recommended. You don't need to read this to understand that. You don't need to read that to understand this. It kind of happens in between the panels of this, but it's great. So of these books, this is definitely my top recommendation, probably followed by the Gillen Young Avengers, and then the Children's Crusade is great, but you need to have another background of what's going on at the time. So now we're going to do some ceremonial shelving of these books. By the way, the Gillen Young Avengers is still in the wrapper, because I read that in trade originally, and I had a I'm sorry, I'm interrupting the ceremony. I'll say it first and then do the ceremony. I had a no more oversized reprints policy from 2012 going forward with Marvel Now, because I had them all in trade, but I made one exception, and it was for Young Avengers, because I love it that much. Okay, now for the ceremonial shelving. Here we go. Thanks so much for watching Crushing Comics and listening to a lot of talk about those 4 books. Join me next time where I continue to fall in love with my comic book collection all over again.